Welcome everyone to this, the final webinar in our joint series of webinars, joint between Neurodiverse Connection and NHS England, on housing needs for people with sensory differences. This is a session which will be looking at a topic of technology and sensory needs and inclusive design and meeting the challenge of net zero. So a very topical subject, I think, for many of us. So before I start, I'd like to introduce myself and ask Jill to introduce yourself. Jill, do you want to go first?
Hi folks, I'm Jill Corbin. I'm a director at Neurodiverse Connection and really delighted to be here, excited to hear the speakers and looking forward to this final webinar.
And I'm Claire Skidmore. I'm the National Strategic Housing Lead in the Learning Disability and Autism Programme at NHS England. Neurodiverse Connection are committed to promoting the use of neurodivergent affirming language. Their guide to neurodivergent affirming language is available in their resource library. Please note that in these webinars, though, that as with any content that we're hosting or sharing with input from other organisations, we can't always guarantee that the preferred neurodivergent affirming terminology is always used. So, with no further ado, I'm really happy to welcome our first speaker, Alexia. Alexia, could I ask you to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Claire and Jill. Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join this session. I'm Alexia Kika. I'm an associate lighting designer working within Bureau Happold Engineering. I've been a lighting designer for the past 10 years, roughly, and I've been trained in Sweden and Greece. So I've been sharing a lot of the insights of the recent work that we've been doing in collaboration with Jill, but also other projects when it comes down to lighting for inclusive lighting practices for homes, with an angle of net zero recommendations as well. So I'd like to just give a very brief introduction of how I really got here. As I said, I have a roughly 10 years experience on lighting design, working primarily for the architectural environment. So it has nothing to do with events or anything like that, but it really is wide from an external perspective all the way into like cultural buildings, residential properties, as well as retail and commercial aspects. So when I joined the company, I started working with guide dogs training centers, and it was probably one of the early points when I started being a bit more aware about inclusive practices and how lighting can facilitate those. A bit further down my journey, I met Jill, and then we had a really good collaboration around lighting sensitivity and sensorial differences, particularly with an angle of autism. And this collaboration actually brought a lot of people together from universities such as UCL, from engineering bodies, as well as NHS England. After this, I led the lighting design for the refurbishment of the new building for the Royal Institute of the Blind. So I became a lot more aware of the specific preferences of these user profiles when it comes to sight loss and visual impairment. And currently I'm working with Transport for London with the hope to put a set of inclusive lighting guidance practices for their own inclusive design standards. So in today's session, I will go briefly I will touch on some key topics, start with a wide lens and talk a little bit about light and humans. Then I'll give you reasons why the impact of net zero and why it's important in lighting. And then I will talk a little bit about the basics of lighting and inclusion. And then I'll give some more specific recommendations and influencing criteria for residential properties. So when we talk about light, we have to think about it as a wide spectrum. As humans, we only see a very small part of it, but we are heavily affected by it. It really spans between the nanometers that you see on the screen, and its composition is basically resulting in what we know as daylight. And daylight is our constant companion in life, and we reference artificial lighting and we compare it to daylight as well, because it has all of the qualities that are affecting our human body and our biological rhythms. So daylight throughout the day is changing in color, is changing in intensity, but also directionality. And these changes are triggering different secretions of hormones within our bodies, and it induces us to relax or be more alert, depending on the time. And obviously, as these transitions are made throughout the day, we are not necessarily aware of them, but our bodies are very much synced, and therefore we always reference artificial lighting practices, and we try to reference them back to the daylight behavior. So when we look at our daily life and how it's structured for a typical human, we spend a lot of our time at work, obviously seeking development and fulfillment. Then there is a piece of recreation that is helping us to grow and keep healthy. And of course, when we rest, we are able to recharge and cleanse our systems. And light is definitely transcending through all of these phases of our daily life, as well as its absence. So we need equally the presence as well as its absence to make sure that we are having our best selves at the start of each day. And so when we look at our rhythms, we realize that these variations in lighting intensity, in color, and directionality are affecting our biological health, but are also extending to our mental health aspects. And depending on the day, there is obviously different times that we are best coordinating or best reacting or having the best sleep. And these are things that are so deeply rooted within us that in order for us to take our lives and our daily matters at home or elsewhere in a more coordinated way, we have to take learning points from this inherent link between daylight and our bodies. And so we see that there is a twofold when we talk a little bit about artificial lighting. There's an emotional aspect. So depending on the variation of color, we feel a bit more cozy or colder, more alerted. And there is a biological aspect. So with the variation in intensity, we feel more relaxed or we get tired. And if the light levels are increased, then we feel a lot more on edge sometimes. And a lot of us, obviously, we're spending little or more time at home, and depending on the time of the day, these variations can affect how we are perceiving the environment. And if we combine those two, we obviously get benefits of both aspects, of the emotional aspect as well as the biological aspect. And we have seen that gadgets that we use on a daily basis are actually tuning in with what daylight is doing and what it's supposed to be doing. And it's affecting a lot how good of a sleep we get and how well we are rested. So one of the biggest aspects when we are talking about lighting for homes is to make sure that we are putting ourselves in a route to get good sleep. Now, I'm going to briefly give a little bit of an angle of what is the impact of net zero in all of this. And I'm going to say this because obviously developers and councils are following the government's directions, and there is an ever-restricting tendency now to manage power, energy, and make sure that our homes are as energy efficient as possible. Lighting is inherently linked to that, and it is important to take in account the percentage of contribution for that rating that each of our homes has. So currently, it is imperative that this energy rating keeps on improving. And we have to think about from the materials used to the heating systems to lighting and other installation systems as well. So the document on the right is part of the building regulations that all of the dwellings need to align and show compliance with. And this includes strict recommendations or strict timelines about when this needs to happen and how much power each of the dwellings need to be consuming in the forthcoming future. Now, when we are thinking about how it is affecting the design process, I would say that a lot of the developers or the councils are seeking quick wins, which is not a very good term to use, but unfortunately, this is the reality. And one of them has been identified to retrofit existing lighting that is not LED into LED lighting. Because LED lighting is seen to be quite energy efficient, but that doesn't mean that all lighting that is LED is the most comfortable to look at or be under. And this is where it becomes a lot more relevant for people of different groups, because we know that neurodivergent people might have a higher sensitivity to certain types, such as glare, flicker, which I'm going to analyze a bit further in the presentation. In the process of renewing and updating our homes, we have seen that the cost and the compliance with these energy requirements seem to take precedent. And this means, unfortunately, that a lot of the times visual comfort or high quality design is being compromised. So we really have this conflict between sustainable design and inclusive design, design that is very comfortable and it's healthy for the people that are using the spaces. And the task really that the lighting designer like myself needs to undertake very often is to find this balance between good efficiency from an energy perspective and good well-being from a comfort perspective. Basic aspects when it comes to how lighting is affecting inclusive design. I would say that regardless of all of the energy standards that we are being asked to comply with in the built environment, we always have to remember that we design for the people that are using those spaces. And it is important to have the people becoming a sole driver or a decision maker in this process. It cannot just be energy requirements, because in this way we will make spaces that are not necessarily pleasant to inhabit. So when we talk about lighting and inclusion, there is various groups of people that are being affected differently from lighting. So to just name a few, there is neurodivergent people that exhibit in some cases, in some proportions, photosensitivity, which I'm going to explain a bit further. And it can also lead to sensorial overload because of lighting, but other contributing factors as well. There is neurodegenerative people that are very sensitive to contrast, and it can lead to confusion a lot of the times, as well as overwhelm. There's people with vestibular conditions that we see that a lot of the times lighting could contribute in creating balance situations. Then we have visual impairment, and as I briefly touched on before, through my work for guide dogs as well as the RNIB, where glare and flicker are very important aspects, because as you can appreciate, depending on the type of visual impairment, there is also a level of sensitivity to different things. If someone doesn't have their central vision, for example, they could be a lot more prone to flicker. But if they have their central vision but no peripheral vision, they are more prone to glare. And of course, we have to think about people with mobility requirements. And this really, from a lighting perspective, is a change of viewing angle, because someone who is in an assisted position is obviously looking at the surrounding environment from a different viewing angle. Now, in terms, for those of you that want to have a further read on codes and guidance that are available right now, I mean, we know the work that has been done as part of the Equality Act, and this resulted obviously to the British standards that are focused on inclusive built environments and accessible built environments. And then 2 years ago, there was also the issue of tailor-specific guidance to inclusion and accessibility. And it really focuses on sensory processing differences, not just from a lighting perspective, but other contributing factors as well. So to look a bit further onto what photosensitivity means, it is a shared experience, and it doesn't have to be someone who is neurodivergent. To be honest, a lot of neurotypical people have come forward and expressed their sensitivity to light and their aftermath that this could bring. But what really could be different, there is physical differences within the central nervous system. There is difficulties in sensory integration because you get a sensorial overload or overwhelm. And of course, there is some people, as I explained before, that have visual impaired system and pupillary light reflex conditions that are contributing to this photosensitivity. And if we wanted to understand a bit more about what is the experience of sensorial overload, we have to think about it as a, sometimes we call it a bucket of energy, but the more stimuli there is, the more information need to be processed. So a lot of the times taking the minimalist approach is probably where we want to be. And as I said before, lighting is a major contributing factor, but it's not the only one. Sound patterns and contrast are contributing equally to this potential overwhelming experience. And this could result from like more temporary effects, such as high stress levels, migraines, to more long-term effects, sleep disorder, difficulties in social integration, prolongation of inpatient settings, as well as obviously worsening educational outcomes and prolonging rebalancing. So having had this basis, which is a bit of a wider lens of why things are important, we will now look a bit more closely on the home environment and understand how lighting can make a difference. So I wanted to really go back and think and reflect on what is home for each of us. It's obviously a place where we find comfort. There is a place where we socialize, but we also recharge. And we have to think that a home is definitely a place of shelter for each of us. So we have to make sure that it is the most comfortable it can be for the individual that is returning back or starting the day within. I wanted also to have a look at the lighting of a typical flat, and this hopefully tries to express how sometimes developers see lighting for a typical flat that is obviously repeated thousands of times. So many of you might have a grid of downlights in your ceilings, perhaps some pendants over counters or over your living room table. And then on your bathrooms, again, probably a collection of downlights, and bedrooms typically just have a single power supply in the middle. Obviously, all of these are placeholders. And unfortunately, this is something that is from a sustainability perspective, also wasteful, because they are placeholders for people to come in and tailor. But then a lot of the times they really don't reflect what people need. And it's just to make sure that there is power supply there and there is light there for the flats to be utilized and inhabited. But it is very clear that lighting is not only covering a functional need, and it's covering an emotional need as well. So we have to really go through and understand what the lighting needs are in each of the spaces of our home. And we do need to think of the context, because if we apply light in a void space, it's not really going to do anything. So we have to think if it is a working area where you have a desk. I mean, obviously everyone has a desk now in their homes after COVID. We have to think if it's a task area where it does require certain levels to perform the task, such as a kitchen counter or a vanity. And then we also have to think about what we are doing in this space. So if the aim of the space is to relax and perhaps reflect on the day, such as the lounge or our bedside. Also note that in our spatial awareness, light is not single dimension. There's a lot of layers of lighting within our daily impression of our home. So there's definitely an element of daylight. We have task lighting, which is primarily on, like, as I said before, above kitchen counters or anything like that. Ambient lighting is just infill, which is most of the times what we see in homes. And then there's also accent lighting, which is actually not very widespread in use, but it really is about putting focus on verticals, because as humans, we don't actually see that much the horizontal. We see more of the vertical surfaces around us. And therefore, it is important to consider vertical surfaces when we are lighting a space. So moving on to the criteria that a lighting designer would consider when we are putting together a proposal for a space. First of all, we have to think about how much light we put. So we need to think what we are doing in each of the spaces, as I said before, and what is the conditions of daylight in that space. We do design for nighttime, obviously, but we need to always be aware of that interface of how much daylight can actually contribute in the perception of the space. Another aspect is what we call color temperature. This is not colored light, it's white light, but it varies in hue. So the pictures on the screen are making a direct reference to daylight, essentially. And they're going from cool white colors, which we see on a midday sky, all the way to a sunset color, which we see which is a lot warmer and a lot more varied palette. And then we always have a primitive reference back to fire, which is the warmer spectrum. So we do know that for autistic people, for example, there is a strong preference for warm color temperatures and a real aversion towards cooler color temperature. But for someone who has visual impairment, they actually prefer cooler color temperatures. So it's important to be aware of these differences, because it only really tells us and reinforces the argument that we need to have a flexible system in our homes. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. We also think about the directionality and how during daytime it feels natural to have light from above, because that's what the sun does. So we see downlights and pendants within our homes. But during nighttime, if you are a person like me, I don't actually have any overhead lighting in my home. And the light comes from below. It comes from sources that are either table lights or floor lights. And it really is a reflection of what daylight does, because obviously the sun goes lower in the horizon and we feel more natural to use uplighting or indirect lighting. Is a subject that is highly subjective, and it's relevant for all types and all groups of people. It is in general a reduction in visual performance, and we think about it as visual discomfort. It's something that could could throw someone into like their own, like have a veiling effect as well, or it could have a longer lasting effect. And it really is a comparison of the positioning of the individual, the viewing angle, and the brightness of the room in general, and of the light source. So it's a very high contrast that our eyes are perceiving as glare. I wanted to just state that glare also occurs in the natural environment. So it's not something that we are not used to it. But again, we are a lot more tolerant in aspects when it comes to the natural environment rather than what we are creating within our homes. So how can we really avoid it? And this is something that plays into the net zero and sustainability aspects, because some of the times when you are concealing the light source, the more you conceal the light source, the less sustainable it becomes. And I have an example in the next slide. But in order to see some of the measures that we could adopt to reduce glare, is to install anti-glare filters or lens covers or louvers. We have to choose fixtures that are placing the LED light source as far away possible from the surface of the ceiling, for example. So quite a deep set position of the LED. Or a third one would be to choose luminaires that have darker surfaces around them, like the downlight on the right here. So dark or black baffles or dark reflectors. And this really is because lighting is obviously reflecting in white a lot more, and therefore we are perceiving glare through that reflection. So I wanted to take the simplest and most commonly used typology of luminaire, which is a downlight, and really see how we can take it from its worst case to its best case and analyze what are the wins and the losses in that journey. So most of the homes might have a light source like the one you have on the screen right now. And you can see how the LED and the reflector are just up against the front face of the luminaire. And this is what I was saying, that this is definitely going to create glare because we have a very clear view of the light source. Now, the next option would be to slightly deep set it, but you can still see the LED chip. So it's very clear that you will see this high contrast and you will be glared or feel visual discomfort. And a lot of people say, okay, let's just put a diffuser in front of it and everything is fine. But again, it doesn't necessarily clear the solution. In some specific cases, yes, having a diffuser is helping, but it doesn't really work as a one rule fits all. Now, perhaps a better solution could be to have a black baffle and deep set the LED. So then you start making it harder to see through, to see into the light source, and you make sure that the neighboring surfaces are darker, which means you're not getting a lot of reflection back. And of course, the optimum would be even to put a honeycomb, which is basically this layer that just sits in front of the light source, and it creates an additional level of anti-glare. Now, in this process, it's important to understand what we lose and what we win. So, of course, we have a win in terms of visual comfort as we go from one product to another, and a lower perceived contrast. which is very important for a lot of the different groups that we discussed before. We are also lowering the efficacy, though, which is something that is important for sustainability. So when we do that and where we do that and taking an informed decision, it's important to think about. And as we are doing these actions, we are probably also adding on cost, initial cost, but there is a higher return and a better value in the longer term. Now, when it comes to flicker, it's probably something you have experienced before, but it's this intermittent feel of a light switching on and off. It is true that neurodivergent people tend to have a higher sensitivity to flicker, as well as I mentioned before, people with visual impairment. So it is important to make sure that we are doing compatibility checks on the whole assembly of what we call a luminaire system, which is not just the light source, it's also the driver that is plugged onto the light source, converting the 220 volts from our supply into what LEDs support, which is typically a lot less voltage. So in this process, we need to make sure that we have a compatibility test done to ensure that smooth dimming is achievable if our luminaires are dimmable, and there is no flicker occurring that is perceived and affecting our psychological but also biological health. There is a standard that I have quoted here, but unfortunately this standard is not necessarily tailored to people with higher sensitivity. Other influencing factors which we need to consider is material, finishes, colors, and hues. I'm putting this here because without materials and physical objects in our environment, we cannot see light. So we only see light through the reflection and through the absorption or through the refraction of the electromagnetic radiation that I discussed in the beginning, through the reflection on materials. So our experience of a space will change dramatically if we change the materials and the colors of the space. And that's why it's always important to assess lighting in tandem with the materiality when it comes to reflectivity as well. So make sure that we are taking in account all these incident angles. I've placed at the top the scale that is the light reflectance value, only to make the point that we also have to think about perhaps people who have achromatopsia. And these people will be judging based on contrast, not based on color. For example, green and red have exactly the same reflectance value. So for someone who has achromatopsia, they will be seeing it as the same color, the same hue for them, and perhaps not acknowledging the difference in the space. Having now spoken about all the criteria, I'm going to draw slowly into a close by giving some recommendations when it comes to sustainability, because I know this topic is very, very hot at the moment. So when we're talking about sustainability, we have to think about it as a long-term project. First of all, we have to assess what the baseline of our homes is. Is any of what we have able to be retained? Is it good for the future? Would it serve us in a longer term or not? If not, then we have to design or buy elements that are adaptable. And this is important because the LEDs are still developing in terms of efficiency. So the more time passes, light sources will become more and more efficient. And we have to think that the housings of our luminaires will not change. So we have to ensure that we are able to upgrade our fixtures without necessarily throwing the whole luminaire assembly away. So looking out for modular systems is very important when it comes to residential lighting or all kinds of lighting to enable us to exchange the componentry as it becomes more efficient in the future. And it also gives us this return of making sure that we are returning the components back, that they can be upgraded, reused, and recycled. And as I said, we need to invest in longevity. Yes, initially and at this point, maybe the system will cost a bit more than in the future, but it's important to consider what's the long-term return of the system for us and the people who live in the houses. We discussed about planning for future repairs. The modularity helps a lot in that. And I would just highlight again that it is very, very important to make sure that we are not compromising on visual comfort. So a sustainable design can be really inclusive, and inclusive design can be sustainable. It's these two things that they have to marry up under this set of principles that you have on the screen here that are actually applicable to both, and they serve both well. So utilizing daylight, having high quality design, as we discussed before, the adaptability for the future, and giving flexibility depending on the user preferences. I just wanted to make sure I have a little bit of a note about daylight. It is true that because daylight is free, it's the most sustainable source of light, but it has to be designed appropriately. And it could also become quite a burden if we don't control it correctly. So, of course, it has a benefits because it can minimize the amount of artificial light we use and hence energy, reducing the energy demands and operational carbon. But also it can shape really the spatial experience of the space. I would say that every time we have a task at hand, it's important to analyze and get contextual understanding. Having good knowledge of the physical environment, the demographic and the people that are occupying the space, as well as what type of tasks, whether they are visual or not, are being undertaken in that home. Using, of course, best practice, research and test solutions. It's important to take time to do that because we have seen that there is not enough research right now about preferences of people with various conditions. And then really think about making sure that there is a flexible system at hand that is giving choice to the people who are inhabiting the space. So I'm going to summarize this presentation with this slide, hoping that this concludes and includes all the key takeaways. I would have thought that a home's design should definitely consider zoning of lighting, so not just one switch that turns on and off all lights and that's it. It should also have variations of conditions, so areas where there is localized control, where areas perhaps where we have daylight control, or life-centric, meaning mostly these variations of light intensity and light color temperature throughout the day and the night in order to make sure that we are facilitating these changes in ambience. And quality light sources, making sure that they are flicker-free, they are full spectrum, so they are giving us good representation of colors. If dimmability is possible, then it should be encouraged, and making sure that we are having this compatibility of componentry. And above all, a space feels a lot better when we have some kind of autonomy over it, because we are able to tailor it, and therefore smart controls or some level of localized control would make people feel at ease and make sure that they can actually change their environment the way they like it. I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexia. That was such a fascinating deep dive into some really relevant issues, I think, for everyone working in housing and working with people who may have neurodiverse needs. So thank you, Alexia, and I'm really happy to now welcome our second speaker, Rachel.
Yes, I'm Rachel Wooden. I'm an occupational therapist, a specialist occupational therapist in housing. Hi, Ron. In Wandsworth and Richmond councils. I've been an occupational therapist for over 30 years, but have been very passionate about our homes. Sort of started off in the community, sort of in social services, children and adults. Realised how much of a compromise that we so often do, and have become very passionate about how we design and build homes so that they are inclusive and accessible. So I suppose that's sort of like a basic introduction, and I'll sort of say a little bit more about myself and my role as the presentation begins. And I think just to say thank you to Alexia, because that was such a fascinating, really interesting presentation, and it made me think about my own home and my lighting and my sensitivities, but also the homes that we're building as a council. So I might be getting elected to come and have a look and see what we're doing. So yes, just to say that thank you so much for inviting me to speak. My passion is about inclusive and accessible design. When it comes to sort of new technology, I have had to ask for some help on that, so I'll explain that a little bit later on. And I think what I wanted to do today was give you a little bit of a flavour of what we're doing as a council. We're not perfect, but we are learning continually. I think we're doing some good things. We're learning a lot from other people as well. So hopefully this will give you a little bit of a flavour. The next slide talks a little bit about myself and my role. So our roles in Wandsworth and Richmond as specialist housing occupational therapists are sort of fairly recent. I helped to really start these over about the last 10 years, but they've grown, and we now have 3 occupational therapists who are specialising in housing, and specifically based in our housing department. And our roles are to champion inclusive, adaptable and accessible design. And my role in particular is to make sure that I'm involved from the very, very beginning of the design process. So right from design process through pre-app stages, all the way through sort of our planning applications, out on site, working with different teams to make sure that inclusive design is absolutely embedded in our policies, in our designs, in our builds. It means that I work across different teams. So I work with our housing enablement team, and that's working often with developers and housing associations across both boroughs. I work with our in-house development team, and we are building new homes on infill sites, and that's what I'll talk about mostly during this presentation. But then I also work with housing policy and planning policy, and we've got much better standards now that are embedded in our policies around accessible and adaptable homes and specialist housing requirements. And then across all stages, architects, planners, developers, contractors, and also adult social care colleagues work very closely with, particularly around our supported housing needs. So our next slide will tell you a little bit about our in-house development team, especially around our supported housing. So as a council in Wandsworth, we are building our own supported housing now, which we're very excited about. It is developing and improving, I think, as we build each one. We have built 2 so far. We're just about to sort of go out for tender for our 3rd. And I think regardless of whether the homes are supported or general needs, we use the same basic inclusive design requirements for all our homes. Particularly with supported homes, we're looking at accessible bathrooms in all homes, accessible or partially accessible kitchens in all our homes, automatic doors, accessible communal spaces. But as I say, we are wanting to make sure that these inclusive principles are embedded in supported housing and general needs homes as well. And my colleague Jax Reynolds, who I think is on the webinar, she's developed an absolutely amazing suite of documents for us, which we use as a council. We share with our colleagues, developers, housing associations, which looks at sort of the principles of inclusive and accessible design in wheelchair accessible homes, but then also in general needs, adaptable and accessible homes as well. And on top of all that, I've written a brief about what we want in our supported housing. Obviously, when it comes to our own council homes, we have a little bit more of a say in terms of product choice and finishes that I do with housing associations. And when it comes to housing associations, I have to politely suggest or advise, and many do take my advice. But when it's council homes, we do have a little bit more of a say. So the next slide will show that we really pride ourselves in building very beautiful homes. I mean, they're still council, so obviously we have a bit of a budget, and we can't just be excessive. But we want our homes to be life-giving. We want to encourage people to flourish in community and in their homes. So we're really passionate about the use of beautiful, contemporary and flexible products. We're trying to get away from the old plastic white grab rails and other things which look really clinical. And then we make sure that our products are the same throughout the building. So we try and make sure that our products, whatever flat we're building, whatever home we're building, are the same. So that's both in our supported housing, which you can see here. Alexia might give us some advice on our task and our focus lighting there. I might come back to Alexia in a minute. And as you can see, we've got different forms of lighting, but we have inclusive products in all the flats and all the bathrooms. So in our supported housing, every shower room has contemporary flexible products. That shower seat on the wall, it's quite unique. There aren't many I like it, but once you put it on the wall, it's still height adjustable, so it cuts out expensive assessments later on by occupational therapists and that sort of thing. And then the next slide will show that in our general needs homes, we are also providing some really beautiful contemporary products for our accessible homes. So accessible bathrooms and shower rooms, accessible kitchens. We're managing to get really great level thresholds, which is always the bane of most occupational therapists' lives. But that's one that I saw on site last week, and I'm really delighted about it. And we have parking with most of our new homes as well. Going on to the next slide, this is where I'm going to sort of start talking a little bit about our new technologies that we're using. So in our homes, and I'll talk about this in a moment, that we are already using many new technologies. But our next, some of the next schemes that are in the pipeline will be Passive House. So we're looking at adopting whole building approaches with clear measured targets. We're focusing on high quality construction, which is certified through an exacting quality assurance process. I have to say that's not my own words. That is a little description of Passive House for you all. But we're really excited that we have our next supported housing scheme, which you can see here is going to be Passive House. It's going to have a dedicated sensory garden as well. It's going to feature green and biodiverse brown roof along with PVs to generate renewable energy on site. And the next slide that will show that we also have 3 blocks. This is a small area of regeneration with 3 new blocks on a housing estate in Roehampton, including wheelchair accessible homes on the ground floor as well. And then on the next slide, this is where I have to admit I don't have expertise in this area of new tech. So unashamedly, I went to 3 people, 3 experts who I work with to give me a little bit of information. So for our supported housing and our sort of Roehampton sites, I'm working really closely with our development project manager, Mark Eastman, who is also an architect by background. And he has given me he gave us some information about what we're doing in these new homes. So we're looking at the Passive House certification, which I'd already just mentioned, with high thermal performance, an exhaust air heat pump in each flat and on the communal plant room and roof. It's always a fabric first approach. We get dual and triple aspect homes, triple glazed windows, and balconies which sit outside the thermal envelope, which minimises thermal bridging. And then we're also including a biodiverse brown roof, which provides additional insulation. And he provided this beautiful diagram for those who appreciate diagrams and will know exactly what this means. I'm not going to try and explain this, but this was Mark's information that he's provided for us on these 2 new schemes. And then on the next slide, another of our really experienced development project managers in Wandsworth Council, Richard Goodman. he sort of talked about the journey which we've been on. So he's been in the council for a long time, and he's been with the development team right from the very, very beginning. So he and I were actually part of the development team before the development team existed. And the development team is now, there's now 11 of us. And, you know, he talked about the journey that we've been on. So we've really been on a journey with the tech that we've been using. And you know, I think he and I were both saying that we're really proud of the rising standards that we have across all our schemes, not just with how beautiful they're looking and working on their inclusivity and accessibility, but particularly around this use of new technologies. So Alexia was sort of bringing up, she mentioned Part L, and there's a little picture of that, one of her slides, all about conservation of fuel and power. And Richard was saying that recent sites that we've just completed are reaching 50 to 70% improvement above these building regulations. And that's through the use of green heating, ventilation and air conditioning technologies. Across all our sites, we're looking at a fabric first approach. So with high quality insulation and air tightness. We're looking at high quality and robust windows and doors, often with triple glazing, which is achieving higher thermal efficiency. Air source heat pump powered heating, hot water systems with underfloor heating, which is much more effective. And then the MVHR systems with fan coil units providing heating. And this will ensure our homes are insulated and airtight. So, you know, so even in the coldest weathers, you know, residents will be warm, and it's only really during those extremely cold weather events that they should need to heat their homes. And then on the next slide, he goes on to say that additional things that we're doing, like a statewide biodiversity improvement. So you can see here that some of those two pictures I've got here are new sort of homes within like infill sites. So obviously you've got blocks of homes around them, but we're looking at a statewide biodiversity improvements. So looking at roofs that are green and biodiverse, looking at net gain of trees and planting regimes, installing electrical vehicle charging points, and also including that for future connections. MVHRs are standard in our homes now. But then also looking at sustainable transport methods, so upgrading statewide cycle facilities, new car club spaces, and then funding membership of that for residents as well. PV panels, investigating how we sort of might benefit directly for residents, and then sustainable urban drainage systems via rain gardens, ground cellar systems, and permeable paving. But very, very handily, I was out on site yesterday at somewhere different. So this is not just our own Wandsworth Council homes that we're looking at Passive House, but I also work across Richmond Borough. And in Richmond, I'm working with a wonderful charity called the Richmond Charities, who are an almshouse charity. And they have started to build more homes. And this is the next step for them. They've got 5 homes on a really tight little site. They're doing an amazing job here, though. 4 of them are fully wheelchair accessible, and 1 is like an M, so that's M43 standard. And then the 5th one is, because it's a tight site, they couldn't quite get 5 full wheelchair accessible homes. The 5th one is sort of adaptable and accessible, sort of the equivalent of lifetime homes. And they've worked with Clive Chapman Architects. And I spoke to Andrew Gilbert, the architect on site, who's been working on this build yesterday. And we took some photos of the beautiful roof. I've never seen such a beautiful organised roof. I don't often get, as an occupational therapist, to go up and look at roofs. So this was quite exciting for me. And you can see the stage that the build is at the moment, and what it's going to look like when it's finished. But he did a little summary for me of structurally insulated panels, excellent U values, which are better in those building regulations. They've got that green wildflower roof, although I think not quite as much as they were hoping for in the beginning, but you know, it's there. Triple glazed windows, ground source heat pumps, MVHR, the PV panels. But then he was saying, you know, they're really super airtight. And you can see all the, I'm not going to read out all the bits and pieces there. but they've used the latest Passive House planning package, and it really betters those targets that are required. So they're really excited about this build. The contractors, I think, really get it. They do quite a lot of passive house building. I think it's going to be really beautiful. But the final slide really is the crunch point, and probably where I want to leave the discussion for us, and ask for people's thoughts on this as well. This is all really, really exciting on both aspects, the whole green building as well as the accessible building. And I think we're doing really well in both areas, and I think others are as well. But there are often clashes. So I was out on site yesterday, and while so many things are brilliant, there are slight issues with door thresholds. And this is often an issue that we find as OTs. And I was out on site last week at a scheme that's not passive house, and it's got this beautiful level threshold. And then I was on a scheme yesterday which are going for passive house, and it's really difficult to find a passive house manufacturer that provides a truly level threshold. So that's going to be a real challenge for us. And often along with that is the window opening. So you have the handles and weight. Because there are fewer passive house manufacturers, we just have reduced options. So that's something that we have to think about. Another thing that is a challenge for us is the noise of appliances and units. So sometimes those units that we're going to be using that are going to be better and greener, they might hum and buzz more. So, do we need to be looking at additional soundproofing? And that's what we do. We insist that appliances already are in cupboard, and I'm trying to really push for much better soundproofing for cupboards. We have parking, but obviously you then have the challenge of wanting to have parking-free developments. But obviously it's really important that we still have disabled parking bays. But that challenge of products, which Alexia has already picked up on about with the lighting, but it goes with so many other products. The best bars for bath equipment are not the best bars when we're thinking about water saving and environmental issues, because they need to be deeper bars. But how do we provide bars which are comfortable and use and allow for better use of equipment that are also much better for the environment? The same goes for toilets, the same goes for taps. There's a whole list of different products. From my point of view as an occupational therapist, I always think it's so important to explain why people need things in their homes, why we need particular products for inclusive living. When we explain, contractors, developers, designers do understand a lot more, and I think that's one of the crunch points. But it is that balance and how we weigh up between providing beautiful, accessible, inclusive homes and how we produce homes that are really sustainable for the future. Thank you. That's me done.
Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting and quite inspiring. And I think you've touched on some of the kind of really important issues that we're keen to explore in the second hour. So I think that was a great lead in to the next section. So thank you. Before we go to Q&A, I wanted to welcome Derek Woods to the panel.
Yeah, hi. I'm Derek Woods, NHS England, and my official title is Estates Delivery Lead. Most of my time I'm working on community GP and the acute estate, but within that I'm also involved with the expert review group for LD and autism adapted housing. So I have a bit of a background there in that kind of housing. And I've got to say, this is in reflecting on those two presentations, wow. Yeah, there's an awful lot to reflect on, so I don't know how much time we've got to do it, but there's some really, really interesting things in there. And I think one of the things that comes out for me most is flexibility, about how we bring in that flexibility into all of this. Because in some of the things we do in the RG, we're providing a lot of adaptation to housing already, but a lot of that work is being done because of the potentially challenging behaviours of the residents of the housing. But some of those things that we do because of that, like recessing the lighting, is actually a win-win as long as we get the right fitting in the recessed lighting. Yeah, so we're already recessing the lighting for reasons of avoiding damage, which I think you was pointed to, Alexia, as the better standard of light fitting, but just making sure that whatever sits inside it is the right color, the right hue, and the right kind of light fitting. Again, though, depending on the person and the person's need, because not one size fits all. So I get that we could do an awful lot of this in specialist needs housing, whether that's just adaptations, as you were saying, Rachel, on for all sorts of needs, but specifically, like today, we're talking about neurodiversity and those needs. Now, we can do that in the specialist arena, and I can see that there's a lot we can learn here, and take to and back to that the expert review group, and make sure that we take on board a lot of this in planning and the specification we do for a lot of that supported living. But a lot of neurodiverse people don't live in supported housing. They live in private housing, and a lot of the time it's private rented housing. Now, that private rented housing sector is a really, really difficult one to manage, and then it comes into how do we do that, and how do we bring in that management of what happens there? Because for all the right reasons, those privately rented houses will now have to be a minimum B. Yeah, are going to have to achieve a minimum B APC rating in order to let them out. Now, that for me is going to lead to a race to LEDs, and it will be the quick and cheap and dirtiest LEDs you can do in the private rented sector, which may not achieve anything for us, for anybody who's neurodiverse and living in private rented housing. So it's what can we do and working with councils and how can we manage that sort of thing. And what I was really interested in, Rachel, was you saying that just in general needs housing, you were bringing in some of that flexibility and actually making everything and potentially have accessible housing even within general needs housing. And I'm absolutely pleased as punch that that's happening in areas where it can happen. And I say that because I can imagine that in Richmond and Wandsworth, there's not a great deal of issues around viability of development, which we do have in other areas of the country. So in other areas of the country, we're getting that pushback from everything we try and bring into the planning system. So I'm assuming it's the planning system with which you're controlling that. So we get pushback against any sort of affordable housing contributions, any contributions or anything beyond building regs. We get a real big pushback because it's not viable, we can't do it. So I'm really glad it's been done in areas where it can. And I'm just wondering what we do nationally about, therefore, how do we roll that out in areas where it's not going to be paid for through a development that already pays for itself? So there's an awful lot to do in that area as well. And again, some of those things, absolutely brilliant. And I've been pushing really hard, again, at ERG, that we are carbon net zero in everything we plan and have investment of least regret. But not all the premises that we are adapting are capable of taking the insulation levels required to then bring air source heat pumping. And actually some of the cohort of people who are using that housing don't like underfloor heating, which that kind of system leads to. So again, it's getting that right in terms of the horses for courses, and just making sure that in all of our approach in all of these, we are just as flexible and adaptable as we can be within constraints of budgets, which is always the really miserable thing that we have to think about in all of these things. But yeah, fantastic stuff and some really, really good stuff going on and a lot we can learn.
Thank you so much, Derek. That was really, really helpful reflections from and giving all of your expertise. So really appreciate that. And you're going to stick around for the next Faressa session to participate in the discussion. So thank you for that. I'm going to hand over to Jill now, who's going to facilitate the Q&A session.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone. That was a real treat and delight to listen to you all. And Derek, I'm gonna come back and start with you, if I may. So I'm really curious to hear from you. Like, are sensory needs spoken about? Are they considered? Are they part of the conversation in the meetings and conversations that you're part of?
They are the ones I'm involved in. because of my involvement with you previously, Jill. But no, that's something we have pushed hard, and I've gone back to Simon Corbyn to make sure that they are part of those discussions in everything we do. So we're doing improvement grants to GP premises, or we're doing, as we are rolling out LEDs at an amazing pace throughout the acutes, that we're getting that right, and we just don't roll out bright white lights everywhere.
So much for your advocacy and support with that. I'm immediately wondering, like, how can we get all of those people to see Alexia's presentation and learn more about kind of the detail of lighting, and yeah, it feels like actually we have quite a lot of expertise and knowledge about it, and perhaps sometimes we're not very good at making those links. What's your experience of that?
Jill, I would love to, and I'm more than happy to do it. But unfortunately, we've been on everything's been stood down because of the election. But now we should be ramping up. But we do have our internal briefings. Now, those internal briefings sometimes are just for the NHSE staff, people like me across the country, but sometimes we can invite trusts and other people into those. And I think this is a fantastic topic if Alexia and others don't mind coming and doing a presentation to that group.
Okay, right. We've had some questions, so I'm gonna come to one now. Alexia, this question's for you. So lighting is so often overlooked in housing design. Where or how does one test for individual preferences? How would you suggest someone goes about that?
I think this really is touching on the point that we need a little bit of a co-design approach, as opposed to, obviously, all of us experts in our own fields, but we have to be open to learning points from individuals as well. And I know obviously there is an elephant in the room here. The more people you involve, the longer the programs might become, because there are more voices. But it has been proven time and time again that we should not be making assumptions. So I would say that perhaps having a consultation session, or making sure that we have a good representation of voices within the design team, as well as when things are being tried and tested. I feel this is really the way to go, collecting people's thoughts from their own lived experience, because we all have our own reflections and thoughts of how our space should be to make us feel more comfortable, but also acknowledging that for a lot of people, lighting could be a very subconscious subject, because not a lot of people are giving merit to the satisfaction or the unpleasant experience they have, perhaps, to lighting. It's something that we are so inherently connected to that we don't necessarily pinpoint the fact that it is because of lighting, as well as other matters, as I described before, that we feel the way we feel. But I believe that as we've done with other projects, which are potentially more on the commercial side, a co-design approach helps a lot when there is basically local community consultations, inhabitants consultations, and they do become really a part of the design process at key milestones, before key milestones, rather. So that would be my initial approach, but acknowledging the fact that this does bring a prolongation on programs. And it's something that is perhaps counterintuitive to the really fast pace that we see right now of things developing.
So Alexia, yeah, really important reflection. And I've shared in earlier webinars some of my experience. So I had a lot of building work done in my house, had a full rewire and all the plasters off and all the ceilings down. And with my electrician, I had quite, I don't know, some heated conversations around what kind of lighting was appropriate and what was possible. And there was the electrician and builder very much were advocating for downlights, a lot of downlights everywhere. but for me, pendant lighting is so much like, I tend not to use overhead lighting very much, but actually pendant lighting, it's much easier for me to manage because you can put you can put a shade on it, and so I can block out all of the direct light and I can manage the glare, and it becomes ornamental and beautiful rather than something that only causes me pain and upset. And in some areas where I have low ceilings or where there's building regs, like in bathrooms, I had to make some accommodations. But you know, there was really a lot of kind of backwards and forwards, and they wanted a lot more and a lot more overhead. But they did work with me and have that conversation. So Rachel, I'm wondering, you know, in the work that you're doing, how much opportunity is there for that kind of involvement? How much is there a kind of blueprint that all of the properties are matched to? Do you work with people, and how do you do that?
I suppose as occupational therapists, we spend years working with people. So I'd say I spend 30 years working with people, and you sort of find out what works and what doesn't work. I'm very conscious at the moment that I have much more limited connection, because my job now really is just focused on the new homes, and we're building hundreds. So I, you know, so it's very limited. Jax, who I mentioned, who's on the call, who posted, she works in our major regeneration areas, and one of the joys of her job is that actually she works with people within the regeneration area, so she does have those, she still has direct conversations with people, and our other specialists, and that's residents, I mean, in our borough, and our other specialist housing OT also does work directly with people as well. So we do, and as OTs we very much do, but we're also aware that we're not necessarily the people with the lived experience. So it's just so important, and really important to connect with others. So you'll notice probably from quite a lot of the photos that I showed that when I was first employed, the focus was very much on wheelchair accessible homes, because you know you've got part M of the building reg and it's all about that. But as we've gone on in our journey, particularly, you know, talking together as housing OTs, that's not just the focus. You know, there are people with so many different needs and impairments, and we have to think much more widely about inclusivity. So as well as, you know, listening to residents and talking with each other and other experts, Alexa, we really want to connect in with you. That, you know, that's just so essential, so that the whole discussion about inclusivity is a lot wider. It's not just about physical impairment, it's about so many different other options. I think the other thing to say is that for us, supported housing, and when we do have and when people do move into the accessible homes, we do really want to have resident feedback. So we're starting to get some really great feedback from our residents in supported housing, you know, after they've been living there for a few weeks or months, and that's been incredibly valuable for us.
Right, Rachel, thanks so much. Derek, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, it's just particularly on that bit about you know, where you're talking about the mandated standards for, you know, for supported housing, but we haven't got round to mandating these standards, and perhaps we really need to push hard there to get those standards mandated, because as I've said before, we did an awful lot in the Disability Discrimination Act in terms of adaptations to premises. But I think most premises, if you take into account neurodiversity, have not done anywhere near enough yet to be compliant with that act. If you look at the act to include, and it should, and I think it does. So therefore, you know, we've got an act there already which says we ought to be making these adaptations, at least in public buildings, to comply with the Disability Discrimination Act.
Wonderful. So again, I'm just going to link back to a previous conversation we had with Jean Hewitt, who's an inclusive designer, Alexia, who I know we've worked alongside together, and Jean led on the PAS. I always get the numbers the wrong way around, 6364 or 6463. But the design in the mind, and one of the suggestions from Jean was actually maybe we need to look at a design in the mind for housing, which I think is a really exciting idea, because that really moves us towards having some clarity that we might be able to push on in terms of the British standards and moving towards mandating some of this. So perhaps that's a conversation that we continue and link in with you all to explore further. I'm curious, Derek, and I think you touched on this earlier, about kind of I don't know if it was you actually. No, I said that somebody mentioned earlier about like the challenge of cost. So I think often with LED lighting, what I've experienced in healthcare, but I think also in housing, is that, and Alexia, you kind of touched on this. So LED is often seen as like the quick win, the easy thing to do. We can make this change and we can reach carbon efficiencies. There's been a huge investment, I know, in LED lighting across the NHS estate, Derek. And one of the things that we've spoken to before is how it seems like there's this retrofitting that swaps one for another, but doesn't really consider the wider environment and the detail that Alexia spoke to. Derek, I'm curious, how much are you seeing that within the kind of the housing estate?
In the housing estates, I was saying, the private renting sector, we just don't have that control over it. So if, you know, you're a private landlord, they probably are just going to jump to the cheapest, quickest solution. And I'm not sure that that every local authority is perhaps as forward thinking as Rachel's is, in terms of just general, you know, working with council housing and with the housing associations to do this. So no, I don't think we're as far on with this as we ought to be. And I think we need some really good rollout and lessons learned.
Thanks, Derek. Alexia.
I think to complement what Derek was saying, I think a lot of the times it's also coming down to the fact that we deal with projects in isolation. So we think, okay, let's retrofit lighting only. But as I explained in the presentation, lighting and the way it's been perceived is affected so much by the physical environment. So these changes, just one swap one for the other of something that might look the same, is not necessarily going to create the same experience, because, as I said before, we had so much punctures in our ceiling before because we were trying to deliver a lot more light. Now that we have more efficient systems available, perhaps you only need one puncture in the ceiling, or if it is more than one, then it's conscious and informed why we need that. So I think it really comes down to the fact that a lot of the times we see projects in isolation and we don't make them part of a more general update, refurb, optimization exercise. Especially with lighting, I think it makes sense, because the moment we start making changes in the lighting, the whole physical environment will change, and vice versa. So it would make more sense, and the output would be a lot more focused and impact tailored if things were dealt in hand.
Yeah, thanks, Alexia. And I guess kind of linked to that, one of, again, thinking about my own home, one of the things that I had very strong and clear views on was that I really wanted and actually needed multiple circuits. So there are occasions where I need to be able to put an overhead light on, but in most, all of the rooms where I don't have a single pendant light, I have multiple lighting options. So like under the counter, side lights, overhead lights on different circuits, so that I don't have to have them all on at once. So that, and Alexia, in your presentation, you really spoke about that, like the importance of supporting flexibility and control. Rachel, I'm curious, how much has that come into the lighting design in the projects that you're working on?
Being very honest, I think we need Alexia to come and give us some advice. You know, I've been certainly thinking about task lighting. So we do talk about that, and particularly around falls in bathrooms, because obviously that's where most falls happen in the home. So we're trying to push for really good task lighting in bathrooms. We're trying to push for really good task lighting in kitchens. At times you put in task lighting and afterwards gone, oh, that doesn't look right, and it's not been the best task lighting, but so you learn for the next project. So yeah, it's definitely an ongoing discussion, and Jax mentioned it in the chat. So we've got a big section now that Jax has written at the end of one of our documents, which are continually updated, because we're having more and more discussions about things. But it's that whole learning.
Yeah, thanks. And just I haven't visited any of the properties that you're working on, Rachel, though I have been very pleased and interested to read the document that Jax has developed. But one of my reflections is that very often what we see is that bathrooms are kind of some of the brightest areas. So in my house, like the bathroom, because of the building regs, they had to put in these downlighters, which I really struggle with because of the glare. And actually too much light or too much glare, too much brightness for me would be more of a risk. And so I have a second circuit that has kind of concealed side lights and a light in a shelf in the shower. And so I have the option of both, but actually for me, for well-being, often less light is much better.
Yeah. So with our bathroom lights, we do have sort of 2 circuits, so that people have the option which do it. And then sometimes you also have the little mirror light, which sometimes can be good, but then sometimes can be a bit glaring. So I think from this presentation today, I'm going to be taking things away. We're going to be talking more about what we want to put in our homes.
Awesome. And I guess just while we're on bathrooms, I would also always advocate that the fan is on a separate circuit as well. So often the fan is on the same circuit as the light. I just, like why do that? Have it on a separate circuit. It's so much better. Brilliant. So on the subject of noise, Rachel, I was really interested to hear about the air source heat pumps and the mechanical ventilation heat recovery. And again, kind of bringing some of my own experience, I had a really I had quite a lot of anguish, really. Like I was investing and wanting to have a green home, but also was really conscious of how much I struggle with noise. So again, I've shared previously that I have my fridge freezer behind a soundproof door in my porch, because I can't I just the background noise I'm processing all the time. And so I looked quite seriously at a air source heat pump, but made the decision both because of the type of property I have, but also because of the noise, that I felt it wasn't right. So I'm really curious to and delighted to hear more about how do you manage and reduce the impact of noise, and do the soundproof kind of boxes that you're putting these in, do they impact operation? Have they been successful? Can you talk more about that?
I can sort of talk a bit more about it. So our last supported housing, we wanted, for example, washing machines, for example, wanted to put those in cupboards. And I ended up having a bit of a fight with the designers halfway through. We realised that I think I've been on holiday for a few weeks and a decision had been made where some of the washing machines went back in the kitchen, and I was furious. But anyway, half of them are in the kitchens, half of them are in cupboards, and the ones that are in cupboards, are meant to be behind door. They're meant to be in soundproof cupboards. That's quite a newly finished scheme, so I haven't had feedback from residents about it yet. So I will let you know. I'll find out from residents whether whether they're coping with the washing machines in their kitchens and the ones that are meant to be in the soundproof cupboards. So I'll provide some feedback on that. With the other schemes, I'm just really insistent that we think about soundproofing more. But what's interesting, and I'm going to be reflecting on more, is that we really push for that in supported housing. But we also need to push for that in all our homes. because anybody with sensitivities could be living in any of our homes. So that's an incredibly important point. And the team they're very aware of the whole noise issue when it comes to sourcing some of these new techs. So we do talk about this, and we have talked about it in the past. It's probably another discussion to have, just to remind ourselves and to be thinking about all the different techs that we're looking at the moment. It's a bit of a work in progress. I guess I can't really give you any stats at the moment.
Yeah, like one of the things that I'm often conscious of in conversations around sensory sensitivity or around noise is when we have a conversation about noise, often people they might think of road noise, or they might think of, I don't know, proximity to schools or those kind of things. But often, and I think this is kind of part of the brain difference, part of the neurological difference, is it seems that a lot of neurotypical people can actually kind of blank out or not listen to some of that rumble or building noise or some of the hum. Yeah, so it's really interesting to me how when we, often if I go somewhere, I'll ask, is there any noise, and people will say no, and I'll get in the room and there'll be like this forced air and no windows that open, and actually kind of processing wise that's incredibly demanding and tiring. Derek, I'm curious to hear. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you've just prompted me there, because I on and off between my 4 children who are coming out of my house, 2 of whom are autistic, and my house is maybe partially adapted for the 2 who are autistic, but some of those things drive my other children insane. Myself and my 2 autistic children need a flow of air through rooms. We need fresh air. Yeah, it doesn't feel right unless the air is fresh. And the other 2 complain constantly about drafts and colds, and why is the damn window open, and we should, so yeah, it leads to conflict. So it's when you're talking about housing, the only person in the house might not, what I mean, it's for everybody living there. So the adaptations need to be, but I got it wrong. I bought some replacement light fittings for my kitchen, and then myself and my daughter couldn't walk into it without feeling sick. So we had to change those over very quickly because I just got the wrong thing. So yeah, it's difficult when you've got a mix of people all in the one property.
Go ahead, Rachel. Thanks, Derek.
I was just say it's not necessary the whole neurotypical neurodiverse, because my daughter who's autistic tells me that I'm neurotypical, but yeah, I can't bear humming of lights and noise of traffic, and so that's just high sensitivity, I think. So, and that's 20% of the population. That's a huge percentage, really, of a small group. So it is really critical to be thinking about.
Yeah, and I really sense that the narrative is changing. Like I really have the sense that historically there's been you're being fussy, you're being difficult, it isn't that bad. Like there's been this kind of gaslighting and dismissal of people's experience and sensory needs, and our response to very challenging environments and challenging situations has been kind of blamed, pathologized, and we've kind of been blamed for that. And so it's really exciting to me to hear this like system-wide shift in understanding that's starting to happen, and a move towards actually this is a thing, and we do need to hear people, and we do need to be responsive. And this isn't about specialist housing. This is about how do we get this in general housing, and how do we shift the standard so that inclusivity and accessibility is the norm. Derek.
Yeah, thanks. And I've got to say, there's another arena that I think we really, really need to bring this to, and it will have an impact I'm pretty sure, on the NHS, which is we need to bring this discussion to education, because we see an awful lot of people who break down with neurodiversity, who break down sometime around hormonal changes in their teens. Yeah, and normal school environments do not assist in that in any way, shape, or form. If you walk into a typical high school, you put a neurodivergent person in there with flicker, noise, lights, just about everything you could imagine that creates that overwhelming experience for them. It's all there. So I think if we can work with education, we might have some avoidance of mental health service requirements in those years.
Thanks, Derek. Alexia.
I think Derek is raising a great point here. Obviously, everything we talked about today could be contextualized to other sectors as well, and it should be the case that we consider this as part of a wider commitment, not just for the places that we have to be, such as our homes, healthcare facilities, but even for places that we choose to be, so like cultural buildings, because these are all affecting our experiences and our development as humans. So I do think there is a level of people understanding the impact. As an individual working with lighting for some time now, it was only 4 years ago that I started to become a bit more prone, and through your lived experiences, Jill, understand how my work may affect others. And this is not something that should be taken lightly, because no one in any kind of school or university told me that I could be harming people. On the contrary, everyone was saying, oh, you're not a doctor, you're not going to influence anyone's life with what you do. But that's not necessarily the case. I think the level of care and awareness is definitely raising, but we have to make it, as you say, a norm. I'm not sure if there is actually that much of a difference. Is the cost associated, or strictly the constraint of the way buildings are built that cannot be facilitating everyone's needs, and whether this will eventually, start to reverse and talk about this as a must-have, rather than as like commending ourselves for gaining 25% of accessible homes. And I'm not underestimating this. It's a massive task, especially when you're operating in quite a dense built environment, such as London or wider. But yeah, we have to start making it a little bit more tangible and applicable to all types of sectors of the built environment.
Alexia. And I wanted to come back to something that you commented on in your presentation, and to get some more thoughts from you, but also to invite some comments from others. So you spoke about the kind of the carbon efficiency taking priority over user and visual comfort. How much of that do you think is through people perhaps not understanding? So an ignorance or a lack of information around the impact, as you just spoke to, and how much of that is a kind of a single-minded focus on net zero at all costs? Like, what do you think's driving that?
It's a level of perhaps people acknowledging information, but we have to also be aware that nowadays the energy aspects as well as the well-being aspects are linked to sustainability protocols, or targeted certifications such as BREEAM and LEED. Well, so all of passive house that Rachel spoke extensively about. So all of these are factoring elements of lighting, daylighting as well within them. So there is definitely a tendency of things to be working together and actually influencing towards the right direction. But I do feel that it's still very much a numbers game. And unfortunately, if we see in a lot of aspects of our life, because the qualitative aspects are a lot harder to define and make sure that we have, clear guidance of this works. But one thing doesn't work in isolation. It has to be assessed around other factors. So just getting the energy to 3 watts per square meter, just saying a number now, it's a lot easier for someone to handle rather than given like qualitative data to incorporate into the design.
Yeah, there's that saying that I'm not going to get quite right, which is something like we focus on the things that we can count, or we yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. Rachel, what's your experience of that kind of that numbers game and that being the focus?
Yes and no. I mean, I work for a council, so it's always a numbers game, isn't it? So I do often get pushback when I'm asking for things. At the same time, I would also say that I think that the teams I work for are incredibly forward-thinking and generous, and want to build really good homes for people. And I'm really proud of building really good homes. So I think I'm in an incredibly fortunate position where where we are encouraged to think outside the box a little bit. Would be my own personal take on it.
Thanks, Rachel. And Derek, what's your view on that, on the numbers game?
I'm constantly pushing against the numbers game in every aspect of what I do. We've got huge backlog maintenance figures. You probably see that in the press every year, how much backlog maintenance there is in the NHS, and it's numbers, but it's not numbers. It's not numbers. It's patient safety, and we need to count that in that way. It's, well, we've not mended the drains, and therefore we're giving people little C. diff in large numbers in one hospital because the drains are beyond capacity. But the number's 30 million, so it doesn't get dealt with. So yes, we need to move beyond dealing with things in those in the frame of numbers, and count it as back to the person, and deal with everything from that person-centered perspective.
Derek, I want to cheer on that, absolutely. Rachel, we had a question in the chat. I'm gonna read it. So thanks for these interesting presentations. New low energy technology. Oh, I've lost it. New low energy technology often require a shift in occupant interactions or behaviour from traditional heating systems to get the best out of them. And so I'm imagining that's like, for example, if you have a gas boiler, you can press go and your radiators will come on. But if you have a heat recovery system, you probably need to have it running low all of the time so that it's constantly putting a lower level heat into the house. How do you address that behaviour change as people move into properties, and what lessons have you got that you might be able to share with people listening?
Yeah, as a team, we have talked about it a little bit, because this is obviously, we are in the process of building these homes, and haven't built off as passive house ones yet, but we're moving there. We have talked about the fact that it's going to need a shift in mindset in how people think about the heating and air conditioning of their homes. Particularly, I suppose, for the supported housing, the advantage there is that there will be somebody living on site, so a member of staff who will help to manage that. But it's going to need some training probably, and not just for the residents, but actually for our area housing teams, because it's going to be really different from that for them as well.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much for speaking to that. And yeah, often behaviour change is a bit of a slow game, isn't it? Sometimes we need some some cold nights before we realise we have to start a little bit earlier. Yeah, okay. So I'm curious. I'm thinking again about people watching. So what tips would each of you give for developers, for housing associations, for individuals or organisations who are maybe doing kind of big schemes or a lot of properties, or are kind of are investing? What would your suggestions be for balancing like carbon efficiencies and getting it right for people? Derek, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, and again, my main mantra is investment of the least regret. Yeah, so you invest so that you don't have to invest again later. Yeah, which you might have to do. So if you imagine how something might be used over time, and you build for that, yeah, and build for any future changes like carbon net zero, etc., etc. So you do things now, so you're not going to regret what you might have to do later, which might mean more upfront, but actually it's not then having to reinvest. And I'm on a call at 3 o'clock about one where we might be catching up and learning lessons from that exact same situation. And also
Thanks,
just
Derek.
building in as much adaptability into your design as you can do, so that things can be repurposed or changed because you've built in that adaptability.
Yeah, that's great. My colleague Richard has a saying, the slow way is the fast way. And sometimes we need to pause and take a breath and think about really what's needed and what works in the long term. I'm similarly working or have worked with some, it was hospitals rather than homes, but where they put a huge investment into LED lighting and, you know, focus on carbon efficiency. But actually, if you have to take it out even before anyone has got into the building, then you know that isn't a carbon efficiency, that isn't a saving, that's a waste of time and a waste of money, and yeah, is harmful. Rachel, what would your tip be to like to housing associations, to developers?
Completely agree with what Derek says. I think also listen and talk to each other. So whether that's resident feedback, obviously primarily, but then, colleagues who have some more expertise in particular areas, and be prepared to take it a little bit slower and to sit around the table and talk to each other and to learn, and be gracious, I think would be my tip.
Thanks so much. Alexia?
Difficult to contribute anything more meaningful. I think both Derek's and Rachel's reflections are really hitting the point. I would just say that because we know people want to do the right thing, and developers or councils, they want to do the right thing. And sometimes when we are assessing the success of a project, we are looking at it from an environmental perspective, but it also has a social aspect. And councils and developers want also to be seen that they care. So I think the well-being aspect is definitely something that has to be on an equal importance when we are making design decisions. And speaking to each other is definitely helping a lot more to that, and be more open in learning new things in our trades, because when we are being hired, we are seen obviously by our clients as the experts, but there is so many things that I've learned from you, Jill, or from other individuals that have shared experience, and it has changed a lot how I'm approaching the designs of all kinds of different projects. So there's this cross-pollination, basically, I think, that helps a lot with spreading the word and understanding the impact of our day-to-day task.
Thanks all. So at the risk of us repeating ourselves, I'm curious as to whether you would have anything different that you would add as tips for people who are maybe thinking about making changes in their own homes. So I'm thinking maybe as an autist, someone who has sensory sensitivity or is autistic or newly diagnosed, or wants to make family life a little bit easier. Perhaps people who are in rented accommodation and are not able to make substantive changes to their houses. I'm really curious to hear what suggestions or what tips you might have for easy or cheap changes that people might be able to make that might improve the sensory environment, and perhaps also thinking about carbon efficiencies as well. And Derek, I'm going to come to you first. Do you want to comment on that?
It could be just facetious now, which is turn the light off and put that blanket over you. But yeah, but there are some very simple things that can be done, which is around your behaviors. Yeah. And and how you view things, and just the behaviors of reducing your carbon footprint by just turning things off as you leave. There's lots of simple and quick things that can be done. In terms of physical adaptations, that becomes trickier, I've got to say. Yeah. And I'm not gonna say there are necessarily some quick wins that I can see there.
Thanks, Derek. I have quite a lot of conversations with people around improving the centre environment, and my first suggestion is always, can you turn the lights out? So yeah, I really I really echo that. Alexia, do you wanna comment next? Have you got any improvement on turn the lights out?
To the detriment of my own profession, it's a right to turn off the lights, I would say. There is a lot of technology right now, and a lot of it is actually wireless, and it doesn't necessarily need this wired infrastructure in everyone's homes to be adopted. So I would actually encourage people to experiment a little bit with what works and what doesn't, because we try to fit ourselves into groups, and that leads into user preference profiles. But based on all the studies and reviews that we have done with consultations of individuals, each of us has their own preferences. And therefore, it goes back to the systems being flexible from a intensity perspective, from a color perspective, from a placement perspective. I think there will be a huge revolution once lighting is completely wireless, and you can just relocate it as you wish, but we are not just there yet. But I would just encourage people to experiment with, particularly with controls and different apps that can be adopted just by a single user and fit within the home environment.
Thanks, Alexia. Derek.
Yeah, that actually just reminded me there of one very quick win you can do. And you mentioned it in terms of wireless. What I did for my mum's home is I put all of her lights on her phone, so she can control all of the lights from where she's sitting. And because it's also wireless, it means when she's out, she can feel better because she can turn a light on in the evening if she's late getting back. And that means there's a light on when she walks in, but also for her own, in her head, she's got some security that the lights have just come on because it's dusk. But it's been really good that she doesn't have to get up and bend over to the lamp in the corner anymore.
Thanks, Derek. That reminds me of the comment that was made earlier. I can't remember who by, but about home being a place of shelter for all of us. And that feeling of comfort and safety is really integral. So yeah, thank you for that. Rachel, what would your tips be?
We have lamps everywhere, lamps for all the different occasions. It's really important. Just to advocate for my own profession as well, actually, there are some brilliant occupational therapists out there who are really, good on this sort of subject. So, and there's a wealth of information, written, even better if it's written by people who are neurodiverse and autistic themselves. So I often go to my daughter, find somebody who's neurodivergent and ask, and they're really good at saying.
Wonderful. Great advice. Thank you so much. And just on the subject of lamps, high five to that. I'm a huge fan. And to add that there are some really good like cordless night lights and stuff like that available. So if cords are a problem, or there's other risk elements, there are some really good alternatives available. And also, just again, repeating myself, but light fittings, what are they called? Those things that go around light bulbs. Somebody help me here.
The
Shades. Thank you. That's the word. Light shades. Like changing the light shade can make such a tremendous difference to pendant lighting. Yeah. So again, that can be really, really cheap and easy to do. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so we are coming to the end of our final session and conversation. So I want to say enormous thank you to all of the speakers and panelists, Rachel, Alexia and Derek, thanks so much for joining. Before we finish, is there anything else that you haven't said or that you want to reflect on?
Other Jill then just saying, yeah, we need to roll this out in other areas. Yeah, education being the big one for me. Yeah, but
yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Okay, so I think that comment, Derek, segues beautifully into where do we go from here. So before I pass back to Claire to talk to that, I want to mention this came through my door earlier, and this is a book. We've got a resources page on the website. Within this book, Alexia and I actually commented on wrote a chapter along with Jane Cannon on LED lighting, which is tremendously exciting. Yeah, so we've got a collection of resources. I've seen in the chat as well. There's been some really good conversation and mention of other developments, other standards, the Glasgow standards, for example. If people are able to share those with us, if you can email them to me or get in touch, we'd really love to add them to our resources, which we're collating. So on the Neurodiverse Connection website, the summit page will remain live. Recordings of the sessions will be available, where the presenters are happy to share their presentations. We'll include those as well. And we're also compiling resources. So some of the documents that have been mentioned today will be available. And I see that folks have been mentioning some either that are in development or are area specific, and we're really hoping to use this as an ongoing resource that people can come to, they can visit, they can learn from the work that other people are doing and build on it rather than having to start from scratch. Yeah, so if you've got a resource that you have used or developed or is under development that you're happy to share, even at a later date, please do get in touch. And do check back to the website where, as I say, we'll be adding and compiling further resources. There is also a housing community of practice, and I'm going to ask Claire to speak more about that in a moment. But also wanting to say that I think there's a huge amount of interest in how do we develop some of these conversations, how do we think about how we work together and how we even broaden our influence and make sure that we're sharing our learning in other areas as well. Alexia, I know you and I have previously had a few meetings with CIBSE and others around their policy, but perhaps we could reconvene and link in with Jean around the potential development of a housing specific paths with the British Standards Institution. I think that would be really exciting. So I'll stop there and hand back to Claire.
Thank you so much. It's been such a really interesting conversation, and I've definitely learned a lot. And I won't. I think everyone summed up their top tips really well, so I won't repeat those. But just to say, there's two things that really spring out at me in this. That no, I don't think anyone is an expert in everything here. I think we've been talking about quite a range of issues that all impinge on each other. So that's quite exciting because it means that we need to work together and be as inclusive as possible in bringing in different voices and different expertise. So hopefully, as Jill has already said, this will be the beginning of some momentum around this. And I will certainly be energetically signposting people to the Neurodiverse website for connection website for the resources that are going to be compiled there, which is brilliant. So with my housing community of practice hat on, so I co-chair this housing community of practice for focused on the needs of autistic people with a learning disability, with Neil Reevely, who's the ADAS, which is the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, housing lead. And we talk about all things housing, health and social care, particularly talking about people who are autistic or have a learning disability. And we're definitely going to be wanting to do what we can to support this ongoing conversation. So if you would like to have a further conversation with me, obviously I'll be staying closely in touch with Jill and other colleagues, but hopefully my email address has gone in the chat. Great. So please get in touch if you just want to talk more about this, or if you want to join the community of practice, and we'll make sure that we continue to spotlight some of these themes going forward. So I think that's it from me. And I think we're coming to the end of our session. So I think the final thing from me is just to thank everybody, both the fantastic speakers and panelists today, for your time and for your expertise and your really thought-provoking comments. All the colleagues at Neurodiverse Connection for an amazing series of webinars, and all of the speakers and panelists at previous sessions. And finally, everyone who's joined us on these calls, and all of the really, really helpful questions, comments we've had, that we're gonna, some of which will be leading to additional resources that colleagues will be able to signpost to. And please do watch the sessions if you've missed them. They're going to stay up there on the Neurodiverse Connection website. So there's a bit of a legacy in terms of the conversations that we've been having. I think that's it. So with no further ado, thank you very much, and goodbye to everyone for today.